Welcome to Demystifying Improvisation on the Drum Set. In this 5-lesson masterclass, I'm going to teach you how improvisation works on the drums. Before we get into teaching some of my favorite vocabulary, let's quick talk about what, why, and how we're going to do this. First of all, what? I have 3 goals for this series. The first is to teach you several strategies for improvisation that you can immediately start using mostly patterns you already know and for all levels. So if you've never improvised a note in your life, this is going to be, well, we're going to have several ways to get you started. But even if you're an advanced or professional drummer, I feel confident that we're either going to add vocabulary or an underlying framework for thinking about your improvisation. My second goal is to dispel some of the misconceptions that are commonly held around improvisation, starting with the idea that's commonly held that improvisation is something that can't be learned, and that creativity on the drum set is something that you either have or you don't. Right? I've seen, at this point, thousands of students through my online courses where I specialize in teaching this, and I can assure you that regardless of your level, that effortless fluency is available to you in relatively short time. The third goal, since there aren't many online resources that specialize in systematically teaching improvisation, for those who are interested, I just want to make you aware that my website exists and give you a taste of the type of teaching philosophy that you're going to find there. So that's what we're doing. Let's think about why. Why am I obsessed with teaching improvisation, and why should you spend the time learning it? First of all, if we think about improvisation, it's important to recognize that improvisation isn't just playing drum solos. Personally, I couldn't really care whether or not you can play drum solos. Improvisation is just your fluency in the language of drums. So if you imagine your favorite drummer, and imagine them going to their practice room, you imagine that they sit down at the kit and amazing things happen, and it's easy for them. And not only is it easy for them and it sounds good, it also feels good. Right? You imagine that this is a deeply rewarding experience, that's deeply fun, and that it's genuinely creative, and that the instrument has become something like an extension of their body, and it's meditative and puts them in a flow state. All of these things are true about fluency on the drums, and all of these things are available to you, again, regardless of the level. The other fact that we want to think about when we're thinking about why should I put the time into this is that, if you're anything like me or the average drummer, 95% of your drumming or more is going to be spent with your drums alone in the practice room. If that time can be made more deeply rewarding and fun and genuinely creative and meditative and a flow state, then you're adding more to your life than just cool drumming, right? You're adding something that is significant and positive and sustainable, right? This is an activity that you're going to do for the rest of your life. And I often think that if I were to stop performing forever, I would still go play my drums because it's something deep for me. Again, of all the students I've taught to improvise at this point, I've never had someone start to get a taste of fluency on the kit and start to feel freedom and then go, actually I'm good. I'm going to go back to playing transcriptions. It's a one-way street. So that's why. Now let's think about how. This is where we get into the teaching philosophy, and this is the part that I find most interesting. What we need to understand our primary tool here is going to be constraints. And it's helpful to understand this trade-off that exists between constraints and control. Most people's experience with improvisation is one of feeling extremely out of control. They start playing the infinite drum fill, and it falls apart almost immediately. And despite the fact that you know all these rudiments and patterns, somehow we run out of ideas almost immediately. So there's this trade-off between constraints and control, and what we're going to do over and over again throughout this series is narrow the constraints down to this point where we get essentially an improvisational game that's really simple. The reason it has to be simple is because you have to be able to actually master it. Because if you master it, you can have total control over what's going on, you can understand everything that's going on, and in the case of improvisation, you can manipulate the thing on the fly. So once you master that little game, what we can start to do is open up the constraints one step at a time. That might be an alternate pattern, that might be a dynamic variation, it might be an orchestration. And then that pushes you to the edge of your comfort zone and you're out of control. And then you do technical exercises, creative exercises, and you reestablish control there. And when you do that 10 times, where you find yourself is at this place where you have quite a bit of variation in your playing, but you've maintained the control all the way through. So you feel control, you know what you're doing, which is important. You have to know what you're doing in order to know what you could be doing next. And you're manipulating all these variables on the fly. So that's what we're going to do over and over again. We're going to create these little mini games, and then they're going to grow, and it's sort of like exponential growth. We're going to create several of these, and then we're going to think about moving between them. And this, at some point, in the beginning, it's going to feel like, this is very constrained, and I feel like I'm following rules. That's not the freedom, right, that I just described my favorite drummer having, effortless fluency. But as we do more and more of this, these grow in themselves, and then they start to merge with other ones, and we start to move between them. And so much of this becomes automated and easy for you that you end up in this place where you can play a vast variety of vocabulary on the drums and maintain that control all the way through. So that's how we're going to go about learning improvisation, which many people think you can't learn. The last thing I want to mention before we start is that I'm treating this series more like a lecture series at a university level in terms of its rigor, as opposed to your typical YouTube lesson where you have a couple quick takeaways. So all that I mean by that is what we're going to do is we're going to trace out some paths of study that are, if you follow them, you could study for days or weeks or months, and that if you do that, they'll develop a really vast variety of vocabulary. So I would encourage you, in the spirit of treating these lessons in that way, to do things like take notes. Feel free to pause and actually work out some of the stuff we're doing. Everything that I'm going to show you, actually, right now, these are tools that I genuinely use in my playing, and you're going to see in this series, in each lesson, how they progress from these early, relatively basic stages through various steps to a place that is obviously what some of your favorite drummers are playing. So let's jump into our first lesson. In this first video, we are going to learn the building blocks approach. And the first thing that we're going to learn is actually this type of improvisation. I wanted to start with some vocabulary that I am constantly using in my own playing that's flashy, but that, well, exemplifies this approach and is relatively easy to learn. So everything that I just played, we're about to trace out. Let's jump into it. With the building blocks approach, what we're doing is we're learning to rearrange chunks that are the same length on the fly. So what I just played and what we're about to learn how to improvise with is only 2 patterns that I'm rearranging and then orchestrating. So if we focus first on just rearranging these patterns on the fly, let's start by identifying what they are. First, we have pattern A, which is just right, left, left. We're in triplets, so we're thinking 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. Pattern B is kick, right, left. Now again, the building blocks approach, we want to be able to rearrange these chunks on the fly. We only have 2 patterns right now, so our job is relatively simple. To start, we'll start with some technical exercises. We just go A, A, B, B, simple enough, and we'll start shuffling these up, and we'll try a couple of them. A, A, B, B, here we go. Check it, check it, check it, check it, 1, 2, here we go. Next I could go B, B, A, A. 1 and a 2 and a here we go. And now A, B, B, A. This will be the last one. 1, 2, here we go. So let's identify what our first milestone is. Our first milestone is to be able to rearrange as A and B on the fly. Right? And what we're doing right now, they're predetermined exercises, right? So you do some of these exercises because they help you build the coordination you need, get familiar with the melodies that emerge when you do this. But let's say now that we've arrived at that first milestone, that I'm able to rearrange A and B on the fly with control. What that might sound like is this. I can sing it for you. It would sound like right? I can do this all day at this point. That's our milestone. Now, you might be like, well, that sounds kind of limited still. Like, absolutely. But we have to arrive here, and then we start adding variation. This is sort of a phase 1 and phase 2 that we're going to do over and over again in this series. So if I arrive at that milestone, here's what it sounds like on the drums. I'm rearranging A and B on the fly. 1, 2, here we go. Nice. Now let's start thinking about variations. Right? This is where things start to really kind of blossom and multiply. If we look at our A pattern, right, left, left, A variation that we have, and let's actually return to our again, the method that we're using here. We've established control with this super constrained game. Cool, it's easy for us now. We are technically improvising. It doesn't sound that cool yet because we only have a couple pieces to rearrange. But now we take our first step of expanding and adding variation. So we take a dynamic variation, right, left, left. Ghost notes. So now we're just ghosting that right hand from the A. It's kind of like an A prime. Now if I do A, B, what I end up with is cat, listen. Right, so the melody changes now. Okay, we're getting a little melodic variation out of this, but these little melodic variations are going to go a long way when they start to add up. So now what we want to do is get to the point where our next milestone is, okay, I want to reestablish control, improvising, rearranging these on the fly, but now I have A and B and I have an alternate version of A. Right, so you can imagine what this process would look like as we write out more and more examples like we already have, but now you have sort of A and then you have ghost note A. So if we take A, ghost, B, ghost, A, ghost, B, ghost, it would sound like this. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a... So we're getting other cooler things are starting to emerge, but the point is we're working toward this milestone where now, let's say I've arrived there, right? So I've written out more of these exercises. You can do this along the way here. A, ghost, and B. Randomize those and see what comes up. Now I want to get to this milestone again where I can improvise with control. So now I've got these 3 ingredients, and if I do that, now I'm getting a little bit more bang for my buck. I've got accent A and ghost A, which means just playing A, I can start to make melodies, right? So if I just stick with A and ghost some of them, Great. Now, let's check in before we take our next step with variation about the process that's happening here. What we just did is we had exercises on a page, right? We had specific examples. A great next step is to have your sort of A and B written out, and you're moving your eyes between them, and you're following with your playing randomly, right? But then we have to take this next step where the patterns are in our minds, right? And this is a step that gets missed a lot when we're learning new vocabulary. We get stuck in the page. The reason we have to upload it into our minds is actually really important. And this is principle one. We'll talk about a few principles of learning improvisation as we go. Principle one in learning improvisation is that early improvisational exercises need to imitate not only the technical drumming that happens at mastery, it needs to imitate the internal tools and the internal experience that is also happening at mastery. And one of the things we know we're going to need to be able to do is rearrange chunks of drumming on the fly in our minds, right? We're not going to have a page to look at. So we need these bits of drumming up here, and we need to practice the skill of rearranging them on the fly. So even if this is technically, the execution of it is easy, the skill of rearranging it on the fly might be the thing that trips you up. So that's why we keep taking these recurring steps where we go, okay, examples on the page, read with eyes on the page, upload into the mind, think of the chunks on my own as I go. So let's take another step in variation here. So we've got 3 pieces now. Let's just think about orchestration. So now let's just take a look at that A pattern. We could move that right hand around, obviously, right? The ghost note option is what's going to really give this life. And then we're sprinkling in our B when we feel comfortable. And then we start to think about orchestrating the B pattern. Kick, right, left. That left hand could follow the right hand. So instead of it becomes. And let's add one more sort of essential element here. We need to be able to land on a crash cymbal. So you go do do ga, bsh, and then we have our A, right, left, left, becomes crash, left, left. So if I mix in just these, what was that? We talked about orchestrating the right, or accenting, ghosting the right, orchestrating the right, accenting the left. We've taken 3 steps of variation here, built on the original building blocks approach as a melodic strategy. And here's how much stuff I can do with this. What we're building right now, this is principle 2 of improvisation. We're building a subset of vocabulary, right? So this isn't everything, right? There's so much we're not doing. But what we are doing is sufficient for us to improvise within this little bubble that we've created. So one of the misconceptions that's held about improvisation is that what's happening is that the drummer is pulling out random bits of drumming from all of the possible drumming that they could do, and they're throwing the next random bit next. There's simply no way to keep track of all the infinite things you could do, have done, are aware that they exist. We just can't handle that. So what tends to happen instead is we operate in subsets. We have this vocabulary in a subset that's hyper-compatible with itself, and that we've trained together to work with itself, like we're doing right now. A couple patterns, a couple variations, and this is a little pocket of improvisation that I'm now making so easy that I can just turn it on and not really think about it. Once that happens, what we find ourselves doing, right? Again, we want our practice at an early stage to be related to be imitating the stage of mastery. What we're finding when someone is fluent is that they're moving between these subsets of vocabulary really quickly and really easily. So if I do a bunch of triplet drumming here, notice when I use the vocabulary, the subset that we just built. You'll see me, I'll keep it on the floor tom to sort of set it aside from everything else. But if I do some sort of random triplet playing that involves a bunch of other vocabulary we haven't talked about, notice how this comes in and out. Right, so I'm trying to set it aside a little bit so we can make sure we're hearing it. But as soon as I stop doing that, it's perfectly disguised within the rest of the flow. And the other stuff that's happening isn't random either. These are other subsets that I've developed at other times that I'm moving between. So what we've just built is our first subset of vocabulary. And if you're following these steps, you're possibly also doing right now your first real improvisation. Now you might be like, okay, we've predetermined the patterns, we've predetermined how we're going to do it. Is this really improvisation? I don't know. Maybe there's an interesting debate about whether or not that's true, but we're definitely on our way there, right? So this is a first foray in, and you're starting, if nothing else, to get familiar with the feeling of improvising, which in this case is the feeling of rearranging these patterns on the fly in your mind and choosing dynamic and orchestration variations on the fly. Right? So you've got two creative layers that you're managing simultaneously. Congrats, that's your first subset of improvisational vocabulary. And if this is your first time improvising, congrats on that as well. You're paving the path. So here we go. Let's take a look at another subset of vocabulary. This one's going to build, we're going to use 3 patterns in this one, and we're going to base it around one of everyone's favorite patterns, including myself. That's the 6-stroke roll. Right, left, left, right, right, left. Right, left, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right. We're still in triplets. Left, right, left, left. Sounds like this. So let's create an A, a B, and a C now, and then let's walk through the same process. And my first challenge for you overall would be to, every time you're at the practice pad now, instead of just looping a pattern, do what we're doing now. Create a couple alternate versions of the pattern that have, importantly, that have melodic differences, and then practice rearranging them on the fly. So we have our 6-stroke roll. Next, let's take, let's as a B, let's ghost the right hand. So we're going to have so we end up with this anticipation. Now, you know the process. We write out patterns. A, A, B, B. B, B, A, A. A, B, B, A. okay, we have a tiny little melodic variation, but that's something. And then we go, okay, let me now move my eyes between A and B, and I'm going to randomize them with my eyes, and therefore my playing. And now let me move those into my head so that I'm practicing the skill of rearranging them from within. Here we go. Great, I feel really comfortable with that. Let's add a third pattern. Let's do something that's melodically significantly different. Right, left, left, right, left, left. So now we have A, B, C. Let's say we do A, B, C, A. So we're starting to get some nice melodic variation now, and obviously we could do some more examples. A, C, A, B, what would that sound like? Sing it. A, C, C, da, da, C, C, da, da. All right, and now we move our eyes, A, B, C on the fly, and then we move it into our heads. Right, so now we're taking that step again. I'm rearranging these on the fly in my mind, and I'm practicing the skill of doing that. Here we go, sounds like this, 3 and 4 and... Right, and we could take some further steps to think about rearranging or orchestrating, or adding another pattern, but for now, let's call it there, because what we're trying to do is demonstrate this process and really hammer in not so much the specific patterns. These are great patterns to learn. I mean, this is good work to do, but to understand the process that underlies these that helps build improvisational fluency. Now, at some point soon, we're going to want to rearrange patterns that are different lengths, right? And that's where we're actually going to pick up where we're leaving off right now. The 6-stroke roll is going to get a little more attention in, I think, 2 lessons, and we're going to start building some really choppy stuff with it. But again, as a first foray into improvisation, this is a totally accessible arrival point for anyone who's already comfortable playing the 6-stroke roll. Let's take a look at a final example here. It's from a course on my website called The 16 Invisible Rhythms as Grooves. And it's a student favorite. What it does is it builds vocabulary that sounds like this. And given what we've just done, it might be surprising that this is the building blocks approach, because it's radically different. So what we end up doing is building these half-time flow grooves like this. Now here's how it works. There are 16 invisible rhythms, I call them. And what they are is really permutations of 2 rhythms. There's ba, 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 extremely the most common rhythm, one of the most common rhythms, and it's every permutation of that through the grid. So number 2 is ba, ba, da, ba, 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 da, ba, 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 da, ba. And then you've got the other rhythm, da, 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 and every permutation of that through the grid. And what we do in this course is we take pairs, right? We convert it into a groove like I just did. So if we take ch, 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 ka, that pattern number 1. First we make that a groove. By adding a backbeat on 3 and a kick drum on 1. And then what we start doing, we do that with all the rhythms obviously, but then we start pairing them up. You're starting to see the building blocks approach take form here because all of the patterns are the same length. So let's take 4 of these patterns and do this and take these steps that we've now gotten good at. And what you're going to be able to do at the end of these couple steps is to improvise exactly this, right? So here's the 4 patterns, and here's me rearranging them on the fly. And so that's only these 4 patterns rearranged on the fly in groove form. Let's do it together. So pattern 1 is like I just played. Let's convert that into a groove by putting a kick drum on 1. Backbeat on 3. It helps to put a kick drum right before that backbeat, dum-ka, so then you don't have to go k-ka with the ghost note. So it sounds like this. Pattern 2, it sounds like this, 3 and a 4 and a. Backbeat. Now we have A and B. Okay, let's pause. Let's rearrange A and B. Okay, we're rearranging A and B on the fly. Let's say we arrive at that milestone. Okay, we're arranging A and B on the fly. That sounds great. We're improvising with these 2 patterns. Let's add a 3rd pattern. Cha-cha. This is invisible rhythm number 6. Sounds like this. If we make that a groove. Rearranging A, B, C. And then let's add the D pattern, which is invisible rhythm number 10. It's one of my personal favorites if I make that a groove by adding a backbeat. Now I've got A, B, C, D in our next step. Well, we did some technical, let's say we rearrange these, A, B, D, C, we write them out, and then we're moving between them with our eyes. So let me just fixate on the page, and I'm going to play what I see. This is a precursor to me moving them into my head. I practiced that for a while, and now I'm going to move these into my head, and I'm going to only use these 4 patterns. Now it's starting to sound like I'm improvising. We're like scratching the surface, I would say. Again, I think there's a debate to be had here. Are we improvising or not? I don't know, but you're at least improvising the order in which these come. And here's the path forward. So then, of course, we take some low-hanging fruit steps here, like we match the kick drum up with our right hand. Or we match the kick drum up just sometimes with the right hand. Starting to get some real syncopation happening here. Still just using these 4 patterns. I'm good at rearranging them in my mind now. We can add some extra left hands in there. We can move over to the right. And we're starting to get a lot going on. Now, that's the path that we could take forward with the 16 invisible rhythms. Now you might be thinking, 16 rhythms is a lot. Am I supposed to remember 16 rhythms in my mind and then rearrange them on the fly? This is actually an interesting sort of element of the teaching philosophy and the progress of what to expect. No, you're not ever supposed to really remember all these and hold them in mind. Then you might be like, well, why do they exist? There's sort of a paradox here. But this is an interesting thing to understand about how improvisation works. What's going to happen with the 16 invisible rhythms, what we do is we pair them up over and over again in these randomized combinations. And as you do this, 2 things develop. One, you gain the technical coordination and independence that you need in order to execute these. But the other thing that's happening at the same time is you're exposing yourself constantly to this type of melody. And you're getting them sort of stuck in your head, subconsciously deep down in there. And what starts to happen is as you rearrange these more and more and you alternate between this technical exercise, you're reading them off the page, you're putting them in your head and recalling them, you start to pass this tipping point where all of these adjacent patterns are available to you that are really similar, and you basically be able to improvise in the style of the 16 invisible rhythms. So when I do this, right? I'm going to play. I'm going to not think of any particular invisible rhythm, but what I play is going to sound a lot like the 16 invisible rhythms, and it'll be comprised almost entirely of them. Right, so I'm now hearing all these melodies in my head that are in the style of the 16 invisible rhythms because of all the work that I did around them. And this is something this is always it's like the most exciting moment when students share this with me. What they say is something along the lines of, melodies are just happening to me now. Right? I don't have to try to combine things that I remember in my head. I'm starting to have this rhythmic stream of consciousness that's built of all of the types of things I've done, not even specific elements, but the types of melodies that I've really focused on. And that is the real beginning of your improvisation journey, because it's with, as we're going to see in the next lesson, it's with that new rhythmic vocabulary at the core that all the rest of improvisation on the drums starts to become a lot easier. When the rhythmic stream of consciousness is happening, the other steps seem relatively simple. And that's what we're going to start building in the next lesson. This was the building blocks approach. In the next lesson, we're going to learn the down-up method. See you there.